experts speaking to each other, and a platform for peer mentorship, for discussing emerging ideas on issues of children's rights. And as CRNSA, what we are trying to do as well is for us to be to provide thought leadership on issues of children's rights. I think it's one of the things that is missing in child rights work, where we just engage on ideas and how they influence the programming work that we are doing. It seems most often child rights civil society organizations are engaged in implementation of concepts, ideas, and rationales that have been developed elsewhere without necessarily coming up with their own understanding of the same concepts that they are using. That's why we find ourselves in more like a stalemate in some issues, where there is no agreement amongst ourselves as to what does it mean for the work that we're doing. For example, contraceptives in schools, for example, issues of corporal punishment. So some of these things have really turned on ourselves to say, okay, we seem not to be agreeing as members of civil society, but we are reading from the same African Charter, we are reading from the same UNCRC, we are reading from the same child rights protocols that our governments have ratified. So what we are trying to create here is a platform for discussion, for clarity of issues, and also addressing some emerging issues that are key to the child rights discourse. So my presentation here, I deliberately started from way back, where we are looking at the political ideologies that govern our governments use when they're doing their work. This is important because I've been in civil society platforms where in the middle of a discussion you discover that we're not reading from the same script. This one is coming from the far right and this one is coming from the far left, and we are likely not to agree on the kind of interventions that we're going to make. So right now, I think Olipa has just muted us. I'll unmute you just now so that you can respond after my first two slides. So as the CRNSA, the Child Rights Network for Southern Africa, we want to create that platform where we discuss issues. And in the process, our fundamental desire is to have a child rights movement, right? A child rights movement can essentially is defined as a platform that shares a similar ideology. At the same time, oh, you can't see the slides. Oh, okay, there we go. So, yes. So what we want to create is a child rights movement in Southern Africa of individuals who share a similar ideology. I know it's not realistic to have people agreeing on all things, but at least we have to agree on the fundamental things. So this is where we are coming from, where we want to use this platform to create that nexus where we understand each other, where we can at least see eye to eye on the discourse that we are talking about. So the key thing, so that I may get straight to the point, the outline of presentation, I'm sure is as follows. There we are. I think we're on the same slide. I'm going to speak about the premise of this presentation, and I'll speak about the political spectrum and the nexus of ideology and public investment in children. More often, the work that we have been doing when it comes to child rights programming, we usually start from bullet number 3 there, where we are talking, in fact, part B of number 3, where we're just talking about public investment in children. And sometimes when we hit a brick wall, we do not understand why. It's because we have not gone 2-3 steps backwards to understand the 1, the 2, and 3 Part A, where we were talking about the ideologies that our governments are using in doing their work. So my first slide on this one is the premise of my presentation. What am I saying? One of the key things, I know I'm speaking to experts here who have been in this business for a long time. One of the key things that has been happening in the civil society discourse is that we often, almost in every workshop, we're told that government, being the primary duty bearer, lacks political will to do, for example, what we want them to do. You know, we say we want governments to invest more in children's rights, but the problem is they lack political will. And my submission in this presentation is that no. The issue we're talking about is not necessarily political will, because we can't put a finger to what is political will. But the fundamental issue that we have to address that governs political will, that determines political will, is the ideology that the government will be using. For example, you may find that there may not be resources to build a bridge or to drill boreholes, but when it's election time, there will always be money for elections to happen, especially if the ruling party knows that they are likely to win. That's where the issue, remember, of political will and ideology. So the ideology determines the priorities that the government will have in a particular issue. So sometimes when we're talking about issues of public investment in children, you will find that it may not receive the same enthusiasm as, for example, when we're talking about youth registration in voting, or making sure that people have IDs towards the election, or making sure that things that give these people mileage, especially the politicians, primarily because the age category that we're dealing with does not vote. Children do not vote, which means there is no obligation of the politicians to address issues of children, because primarily themselves as children do not vote, and usually the parents do not usually take that battle to say, this one is not building a school for our children, therefore we're not going to vote them in. So this aspect of political will, if we go to the root of it, it's primarily speaking to the ideology. So now let me speak to what I'm referring to as ideology. I've put before you sorry about that. I've put before you the political spectrum, they call it, the right and the left. I dare say that all of us, in one way or the other, we belong to either of right or left, depending on the issue in question. So the left, let me use radicals here. People whom we would know. In the context of South Africa, for example, the people who are on the far left, the radical, you put them in the likes of Malema, who are the populists and the populists who believe in the involvement of the government in everything that people do. That's the far left. And the ultra-conservative, the far right, if we were to use the recent politics of America, this is exactly where Donald Trump falls in. Almost all those issues where he raised, where he had international attention about, were issues that had to do with values, were issues that had to do with the reduced involvement of the state in the day-to-day lives of the people, were issues to do with how religion should govern people's lives. For example, the debate during the Republican primaries about, can a Muslim become an American president? And that was a debate that was happening on the far right. On the far left, these are the liberals. You would not find, this is where you find Clinton. Usually Clinton will be around the center left. these are the moderates. I consider myself, because there are some things, for me, there are some things that are in the right that I can borrow, and there are some things that are on the left that I can borrow. So I consider myself to be a social democrat if we're to use this model. So this is important for us to understand, because sometimes as civil society, we do not acknowledge where we stand. For example, we are now engaging with governments to say we want public investment in children. You fail to recognize that our government is far left, which means they prioritize issues of investment in children. They prioritize involvement of the state in provision of basic social services. Whilst on the far right, those are the governments which are saying, no, the state should not be involved in the day-to-day lives of the people, and provision of public goods such as education, such as health, should be done by private individuals. So I can take you back historically. When most of the governments in Africa obtained their independence, they were in the far left, because most of the issues that they were addressing, for example, education, you find that the government provided free primary education to all its citizens, free healthcare to all its citizens. In fact, basic social services were free at independence because the governments were in the left. But then the introduction of the structural adjustment program by the World Bank and the IMF, by the way, those institutions are in the right. They are saying governments are not supposed to be involved in the provision of subsidies or agricultural subsidies or health care or education. They are not supposed to be doing that, the governments. That should be left to the private sector to do. So you then found that in the context of Zimbabwe, for example, in the introduction of the structural adjustment program in 1991, you found the state rolling back or moving backwards in terms of what it was doing prior in terms of provision of basic social services. So where we are now, we are at a position where our governments are still in ideological crisis. Some of them sound like they are on the left, but yet their policies are on the right. How do you explain a government which considers itself to be a leftist, a liberal government that provides public goods for people, and yet at the same time it insists on people to pay for their education? That's an ideological confusion that is there. So when we're dealing with, for example, when we're lobbying our governments to increase resources, you will find that they are in the far right. For example, you find in the far right, that's where there is an increased allocation to issues of the military. Most of our governments, the defense budget is higher than the social welfare budget. How do you explain that? When the country is not at war, how come you still continuously invest in the military or in defense, and yet you are supposed to be investing in dealing with issues of ignorance, in dealing with issues of squalor, making sure that everyone has good shelter, in dealing with issues of making sure that everyone obtains a good education and live a healthy life? So you find that the priorities of our governments are mixed. So when we're now dealing with them, let's locate them for where they are. To say ideologically this is skewed because you are putting your priorities where it's not right. So this political spectrum, I've found a matrix that explains it better. I hope you can see it, which explains the left wing and the right wing. I want you to look at the areas that I have circled there, that I've shown attention. For example, the left wing propagates for the reduction of spending on the military, and the center is saying let's maintain, let's be judicious on how we spend. If we're not at war, why should we spend more, you know? And the right wing, this will be in the context of American politics, this is the right wing where the Republicans would say they believe in war. Actually, they would start war. They are warmongers, as some would say. And the left wing, the second item we're talking about, they support change in order to improve the welfare of all citizens, caring for the poor. The left wing is where we're talking about coming up with social welfare programs which are state funded, making sure that there is no one who is left behind in terms of living a life of dignity. So the state is actively involved when it comes to the left wing. Very active. State is very active in the left wing. In the right wing, there is little state involvement. For example, look at the third bullet that I put a second there. You see, it's saying government should play a small role in people's lives. Private business should ensure needs of citizens are met. This is where we have the problem. When we're now talking about public investment in children, public, by the way, means it's not going to be done by the private sector. Public also is premised on the understanding that the state is the primary duty bearer, therefore it's supposed to provide for its citizens. Hello? Hello?
Yes, hello?
Yes, Johnson.
Hello?
Yes, Johnson.
Yes, you can hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
Can I proceed and finish this so that we can open
Go ahead.
We can open a discussion thereafter. So what we are saying here is that instead of trying to tackle what they are calling political will is a function of the ideological persuasion of the government. That's why you find that when we want to talk about states not providing, you find that that state is in the right wing. It's still living the neoliberal policies that were introduced by the IMF and the World Bank. So this is the challenge that we find ourselves in as civil society. Also as civil society, because you will find that I've attended several civil society meetings where there seem not to be a recognition that the state is the primary duty bearer, where civil society are aspiring, working hard to take over the services that are being provided by the state, and they want to do it themselves. You find civil society that is trying to polish its act in providing, for example, early childhood education. And there is no mechanism to hand over that responsibility to the state, which is the primary duty bearer. More often, those civil society organizations are influenced by the right wing, where there is an assumption that the state does not have capacity or is incompetent or is not supposed to play that role of providing basic social services. So one of the key things that I've been talking about to civil society is that to remind ourselves that it is the primary duty of the state to provide public goods to its citizens. And as civil society, our role is to complement government efforts. In fact, the sustainability of our operations is going to be measured by the extent to which we make sure that the state eventually adopts what we are doing to make it its own. Then they will be playing their role as government to provide for its citizens. But in the meantime, there's a lot of disagreement amongst ourselves to say how much should civil society go? How far should civil society go? Should we provide and continue to provide scholarships to children who are in need of care, for example, or VC program? And yet that should be the responsibility of the government to make sure that basic social services are there for all. I think at this point, let me open the discussion to hear your thoughts about this. And also I'll be glad to hear where you stand in terms of the political discourse, because it greatly affects how you see development, it greatly affects your advocacy initiatives and how you demand from your government. So yeah, let me hear from you what your thoughts are. I would like to welcome those who have just joined us. I recognize Fungai, I recognize Rita. Yeah. So please, you're welcome to participate in the discussion. But now let's talk about this. Where do you find yourself? Because I believe that development starts with me, and the way I see the world is likely what I'm going to lobby our governments or what I'm going to advocate or to push for. Any takers?
Hi, Musa. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I can.
Okay. I also find myself, I think I'm a social democrat.
Okay.
Who tends to lean mostly on the left sometimes.
Okay.
But yeah, I agree that we do have ideological crisis with most of our African governments. And on the issue that you touched on political will, I think when you started mentioning that word, I started thinking, what is this political will that we always talk about? Every time we say there's no political will, there's no political will, but what is really, but you did unpack it. And the examples you gave were also very good, because it's really about priorities and where governments shift and focus what they want depending on when elections are, and depending on whether they feel there's a threat. For example, in Zimbabwe, when they felt that this hashtag pastor was threatening them, they just went and took money from some education fund and they used it to, without even consulting anyone. These are the things that just happened.
Yeah.
This, and then I don't know whether it's true, but from what we read, a lot of money. And you're looking at, this was like a youth development, some development fund for youth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And overnight the money is gone, because suddenly someone just feels threatened by one person who is just writing on social media. So how can we then say political will? What? For me, when I look at most of our governments, they are just looking out for themselves, really. Even when you look here in South Africa, you are looking at people always putting their self-interest first before people. So all these people that they claim that they want to save the people, they are always thinking about their jobs first, and protecting their jobs. And we just have to call it just like that, because, for example, the DA is calling for a motion, I think it's today, to impeach the president. And all the ANCs are saying, no, it won't pass. Why? Because, I mean, this corruption is so gross, and you can't even believe that a president, I think in the West, a president would have just resigned. But no, not with our African governments. They believe they have a right to be there. So if they are very bully like that, and they don't think about the constituencies they serve, they don't think about the people they want to save, how then would they prioritize children of who are even the least on the scale? So it's really, that's why we find ourselves as civil society having to end up encroaching and doing so much, because we feel that the governments are not hearing us or listening. That's my take.
Okay, thanks, Kathy.
Can I come in?
Please, Jones, come in. At this point also, may I welcome Maxim, Fungai and Rita, I welcomed you. Jones, proceed.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Musa, for this very useful presentation, because I think it's helping us to gain an inner perspective in the way, well, the mindset of our governments when they are allocating resources and making different public policy decisions. It's very important for most of us in the CSO sector, rather NGO sectors, to understand this context. I think it is also introducing us into probably what we have missed in the political science subjects.
Yeah.
My take on this is rather, I think for CSO it's very important because we are the victims of ideological confusion.
Yeah, yeah.
Not least because we have had any concerted effort to understand what drives the government, but probably we haven't been exposed to some of these ideas, and it's also because it's also related to the confusion that comes with the government. Because our African governments, it's not so much about the ideological, political ideological divide of the left and center. I think sometimes it's the whole confusion, the whole mix-up of what this government really stands for. And some of the key questions I've been asking, for instance, in my own country, is where does our government stand, for instance, on the political ideology since the days of Arusha Declaration and Jamaa and self-reliance, for instance? We haven't seen much of it. It has all been mixed up of, capitalism, socialism, yeah, this and that, and then it's all confusion. Unlike if we are talking of the countries like in the north, talk of Denmark, for instance, talk of Sweden, where you already have an established economic structure which can survive even without the politics of the day. So our activism don't have any foundation where we can lay in terms of the established structures of the government, for instance, along the political ideology. Yeah. But one more important point that I think we should also be aware of, yeah, for most of our democracies, the politics have a very short-lived mandate. You see, so there is always a struggle, a clash between remaining on, professing the kind of ideological belief that we have, and the struggle to maintain or to protect the voters' base. And this struggle sort of, forces some politicians to not always remain within the same, ideological ticket that that put them in the office in the first place. And so there is some sort of a kind of the shifting ground all the time, where you don't see always the same picture. The picture keeps changing, and CSO, for that matter, also have to understand, the tricks and the skills of changing according to the changing ground that informs the government business. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Where do you stand, John?
Personally?
Yes.
I would consider myself a Democrat somehow. A Democrat.
Yeah.
But again, that's
still figuring out, huh? You're still figuring out.
That kind of in that kind of description, maybe Musa, you can also help us, yeah, understand, this new jargon that's coming up of neoliberalism, for instance.
Yes.
Neoliberal, how does that fit into this structure? Because I can see it's lacking in the political ideology spectrum you are talking about.
So the neoliberal discourse is driven by the capitalist system, yeah. The capitalist system is the one that is on the far right, and when I'm talking about the neoliberal discourse, it's then deriving itself from there, where there is little state involvement, where it's about the private sector providing public goods, and where there is emphasis on growth, not necessarily redistribution, not necessarily addressing poverty. So the development indicators like it used to be before, you would use the GDP and so on. So this is why, for example, after Trump won yesterday, the market sneezed, the dollar plunged. But then when the investors realized that, oh no, this person actually is one of us, is a capitalist, the currencies then started stabilizing. Because there's a realization that he is a capitalist, so he's likely to reduce the taxes. You would reduce the taxes to companies and to the wealthy, under the assumption that when they have more money disposable to them, they will reinvest it into their companies, then create more employment, then create more productivity, hence another growth, which then compromises the issue of distribution of wealth and inequality, because it's not about addressing the inequalities that are there, it's about just creating more, making sure that there is more, not mattering on who is getting the more. So the neoliberal discourse is a capitalistic discourse, which is in the far right. Yeah, so this is where if you notice the World Bank and the IMF.
Musa, I just wanted to...
Yeah. Kathy?
I wanted to ask while you're there, how do these private companies private business is supposed to provide public goods? How? Because I don't really, I don't see that happening. For example, I'm thinking of the U.S. capitalists, and if the government doesn't intervene, even in terms of social security or even Obamacare, why they had to intervene? They've never cared about people.
It's simple questions, Kathy.
So how do we?
Yes.
How can we? Yeah.
Can I ask you simple questions? The water that you drink, where do you get it from?
From the city of Joburg.
City of Joburg.
City of Johannesburg. Yes.
Who pays?
That's public.
Who pays for it?
I pay for it.
Yes.
Myself.
Yes. And when you want to travel, where do you get your transport?
I go for a taxi.
Yes, Uber. Yes, that's called a private taxi, right?
Yes.
Yes. So those are the public goods that we're talking about. When you want your child to go to school, you identify the school and you pay for it. When you are sick, you go to a hospital and you pay for it.
Yeah, but that is different from when a person cannot afford it. And we are talking about the people. When we are talking about people, we are not talking about people who can afford it.
You see now,
and in the context of Africa,
your ideological allocation is now coming up.
Yes, I told you. I tend to lean on the left. I was clear.
No, but this is leaning fairly on the right. Let me explain. For example, if you go to a country...
No, that's not on the right.
Wait. When you go to a country like Sweden, when you have a child, for example, there's a grant that comes for that child. And when you go to school up to tertiary level, it's free. You don't pay anything. And when you get sick, you are attended to by the experts for free. Not that it's free, but it's paid for by the tax that everyone, including the rich and all, pay.
Yes.
So that's the social democrat model.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying, that when you are saying private businesses, you're talking about Trump Towers contributing. But I'm thinking the government, in the case of Sweden, the government has to ensure that transport is there, education is there, and everyone accesses it for free.
And is that happening in Africa?
Private businesses, what are you talking about?
No, it's not only private businesses per se. It's also private individuals. It may not be Trump who is a multinational company, but it's you, Kathy, who runs a private enterprise where you are profiteering from education through your ECD facility, which is supposed to be a public good. Moleboyang, are you there?
I'm trying to follow the discussion, and I'm thinking, what we are trying to establish is, where do you want government to be playing a larger role in supporting the most vulnerable, or are we saying that the non-governmental organizations should be playing a larger role? And my view is that for the CBOs, we are only supporting government.
Yes.
Government should be the ones who are responsible.
Yes, I think this is where the discussion is. And it's premised on the human rights principles that the governments have all ratified. All the governments that we are representing here have ratified the UNCRC, the African Charter, and all human rights instruments, where the government or the state is the primary duty bearer. And when the state is the primary duty bearer, it has an obligation to provide the public goods for its citizens. But then what we have seen is that the state has been reneging on that responsibility. Then civil society seems to have taken over most of the responsibilities of the government. And it's comfortable for civil society to take over, and they are not worried about whether the state is reneging on its responsibility or not. That's why I get worried when I see civil society organizations that are service providers but do not have an advocacy component, where at some point they envisage their government assuming its responsibility of the services that they are providing as a civil society organization. So this is where we are. Maxime, Rita, any views? Fungai? Before we move.
Thank you, colleagues. I think the last point where you were saying you see the government seeing civil organizations taking over more like the role. I think that's the situation where we are naturally sliding to, even though they don't want to recognize it officially. So I think that's the approach. Maybe it's a new form of ideology that is not yet maybe recorded. They agree in principle, but in terms of the real policy, they don't want to formalize it. But when it comes to the practicality, they recognize that it works. So maybe we need to look at it, but in terms of sustainability, it presents challenges. But I think for Zimbabwe, that's the situation we are currently in, where civil society is more like taking over the main responsibility, the role of the government.
And thank you.
And I think that's the most practicable situation. That's the most practicable situation at the moment. We've got no choice.
Okay, and that's the reason.
We are not holding government accountable.
Yes, that's the reason, Kathy. Yeah, we are not holding the duty bearer accountable, and the more we maintain the status quo, the more it becomes the modus operandi. And when it becomes the modus operandi, it will be difficult now to go to government and say, please assume your responsibilities, because we have been doing what they're supposed to do. So my lobbying to us civil society is that at every point we need, even when you're a service provision NGO, there has to be an advocacy component to make sure that the municipality assumes its responsibility, the local government, even the national government assumes its responsibility to provide for its citizenry. Because the more we let the status quo go like this, we'll be sliding towards the far right, Maxime, where the government will play little or no role at all. Then, for example, ECDs will be provided for by NGOs, and you have to pay for it, and they'll call it social enterprise. And in that social enterprise, it's exclusionary. Some individuals will not be able to access quality ECD because they are of their status. And government is not held to account because they're saying those who want can go and access. And if we do that, we are perpetuating inequality within our societies. Yeah. Colleagues, can I move on to conclude the conversation? Is getting interesting.
Yes.
Maxime, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Brenda, welcome, Brenda. I saw Brenda coming online. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you for joining us. Is Fungai still here? No, he has left. Okay, so can I proceed with the presentation and conclude? It was a 15 slide. I've just done 4 slides. I think let me finish. let me finish off.
Musa, you need to cut down on slides, please.
Okay. So let me cut down on slides and go to the conclusion. What is this doing? Yeah. So Joseph Schumpeter says that the budget is the skeleton of the state, stripped of all misleading ideologies. My take on this citation is that when we want to see the commitment of a state to anything that it has purported to have said, let's go to whether it has budgeted for it. For example, if we want to see the commitment of a state to the youth, let's see the extent to which they have budgeted for things that pertain to youth. If we want to see the government's commitment towards infrastructural development, let's go to the budget and see, because the budget is the human rights framework through which the ideological underpinnings are translated into reality in people's lives. So I always say to civil society organizations that it is in your best interest for you to understand the budget process, so that you will be able to lobby states, so that you can be able to hold states accountable on their commitments. If they ratify an instrument, let's go to the budget and see the extent to which they provide for the things that they ratified. You know, so sometimes when we go to the budget, it's a sorry state for children's rights, even though governments have ratified, including optional protocols that were optional. So they ratified, and yet their budgets are not speaking to the commitments that they have made. So I've put here a slide where I'm calling the normative framework for public investment in children. Notice it's deliberate that I'm saying public investment in children. Also notice this diction: public means provided for by the state, not private investment. I'm also using the word investment because, for example, paying for education, if it's done by a capitalist, it's not considered as an investment. It's considered as a cost center, something that just takes money from you. But when you consider it as an investment, is where you are realizing that if we increase our expenditure on education and health, eventually this will help our productivity. This now speaks to the far right people to say, okay, if you want increased productivity in the future, you have to invest in the present, and the present are the children. So the normative framing for public investment in children is in the UNCRC Article 4 and Article 1 of the African Charter on the Rights and the Welfare of the Children. Please, if you haven't read, may you get your hands on the General Comment on Public Spending, which was promulgated recently in 2015, and also the General Comment number 5 on General Measures of Implementation. One of the key fundamental issues that are noted in that General Comment is the issue of investment, public investment, and the discourse has now shifted to focusing primarily on domestic resource mobilization. They are calling DRIM. So So I think in the future we're going to unpack this and explore the opportunities that are there in terms of DRM, domestic resource mobilization. This has been necessitated by the recognition that international aid has not really brought about the substantive progress that we assumed it would. So there is now need for domestic resource mobilization. Lastly, the normative framing for this, I just put there a scripture. Part B of a scripture which says money answereth all things. In workshops usually we always debate whether money answereth all things or not. And the conclusion that usually comes out of it is that, of course, there are intangible things that money does not answer, such as joy, such as safety, but money answers security, money answers home. If you want a house, yes, you can get a house, but you may not get a home out of money. You may get a bed, but you may not get sleep. But money answers things, yes. So the realization of children's rights.
I have money, I will have joy, Musa.
That's an assumption. That's
No, it's not.
It's an assumption. Joy is not.
No, it's not.
Joy is not a product of possession. Joy is a.
Try not to have. Try the opposite, not having money. See if you have joy.
No, joy. You are using two words interchangeably. There's a difference between joy and happiness. When you have money, you become happy. But you still may have money but not have joy, because joy is not a function of possession. It's a mental decision.
And when you have no money, you don't even sleep. You are sleepless. And you are stressed. So how can you have joy when you are stressed and you are not sleeping? That's a mental state. Anyway,
No.
let's proceed.
So you seem to be agreeing with me that money answereth all things.
Yes, I'm agreeing.
Though I am
saying
disagreeing
it
with
doesn't
you.
answer joy.
Yeah, it doesn't answer joy.
Oh, it answers joy.
It answers happiness because you can fly to Dubai and then fly to Honolulu.
No, but it gives me peace of mind.
Money doesn't give you peace of mind. You actually have insecurities thinking that people are stealing from you.
No, it's in the bank, it's secure. In Switzerland.
My friend, ask those who are billionaires when the US dollar was plunging yesterday. Tell me they had peace.
They're the ones who are causing it because they are withdrawing their money. It's not
Yes,
plunging on its own.
it's because they do not have peace.
No, there.
Kathy,
Yeah, okay, let's
Kathy,
Yes.
money answers things. The things are the ones that are tangible. Of course, you may buy other things, but I don't know whether they will give you joy. Yeah, you may buy a car, but does it give you joy? I don't know. I think we'll leave that to our persuasions, and I would still argue that it does not answer intangible things such as salvation, such as peace, such as love. Yes, but things, yes. Yeah, so I think let me conclude at this point. Is that okay, comrades?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Allow me to conclude. Where is that slide again? Allow me to conclude. And my conclusion is simple. We are saying our job as civil society is to create the agency of people. The end game that I'm seeing here for us civil society, number one, is to make sure that the people that we are interested in have agency to hold their duty bearers to account. They have the militancy, they have the organization to hold the state party to account. That's one of our primary duties. The second duty that we have, if you notice the constitutions that our governments are coming up with, most countries in Southern Africa have come up with new constitutions. And in the provision of economic and social rights, there's always a phrase there, a magic phrase, which says progressive realization of this right depending on availability of rights of resources. Now, colleagues, that phrase is problematic because when you're talking about progressive realization of a right, which means you gotta have empirical evidence of where you have started to say to measure whether there has been progress or not. So our job now as civil society is to play that role on creating a body of evidence so that we may hold our state parties to account to say, no, there hasn't been progressive realization of this right. Where we were 5 years, we have actually gone backwards. So there is need for creation of a body of evidence. And one of the slides that I skipped, I spoke to the need for us to lobby for a social investment state in Africa. Like Jones, you were saying, the states in Africa are at an ideological confusion. One day you find them sounding very capitalist. The other day you find them sounding very socialist, and or even in the same speech you are finding the president speaking like a socialist, concluding it like a capitalist. and that's ideological confusion, which makes it difficult, including for the electorate when they want to vote, to say really who represents us better, because no one is locatable in any discourse. They just are saying we want to create jobs for all. Hello?
I don't think they know.
More socialist when it's election time.
Yes. Very socialist during elections. Immediately after elections, it becomes very capitalistic, you know.
Very capitalist.
So we have to lobby our governments to address that component, because the casualty in all this is the constituencies that we are representing, because they are the ones who receive the least. For example, if there is a financial investment that is to happen, the schools are in the remote areas are the last ones to be built, if at all they are going to be built. But towards an election, my friend, roads are revamped, portals are closed, and people are given free rice, which is an idea or a microcosm of how the state should be providing. But then after elections, you have to buy the service. And also, in the discourse of public investment in children, there are 3 key stages that we have to be cognizant of. We have to be active in. The first one, which we shall be talking about in future, is about the resource mobilization itself. How are the resources mobilized? And how can we help our states in coming up with ideas that mobilize resources? One of the key differences between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was on the issue of taxation. Hillary Clinton, being a leftist in orientation, she was saying, we want to increase taxation, especially of the rich and the big companies, so that the state will have more money to assist the poor. So taxation is a form of redistribution of wealth in the leftist camp. Whilst Donald Trump on the right was saying, no, we actually are going to reduce taxation because we want to make sure that the rich have more money to reinvest so that they create more jobs. So usually civil society, we usually are found in the left. One of the things that we may lobby, for example, is to come up with an earmark tax that targets specifically issues of education, making sure that there's no child who does not access education. We cognizant of the fact that access to education is a gateway right. When you have education, it can open more opportunities for you. So yeah, the issue of resource mobilization is key, and the issue of allocation here in the middle is another key component. How are the resources allocated? more often our programming has been focused more on that, to say, oh, the Abuja declaration says 15% of the national budget should go to health, and 20% according to the Dakar declaration should go to education, 10% should go to agriculture according to Maputo declaration, then the Malabo declaration. All these are important on allocation, yes, but beyond allocation, the last component is about how are they used when they are distributed. Then you find that there is no money. If you are to use the Zimbabwe budget, for example, there is no money that is allocated for increasing the productive capacity of the country. If you want to see whether the country is going to move from being a third world, so-called third world, into a second world or into a middle-income country, look at its productive capacity. You will find that countries that are called the fastest growing economies in Africa are those ones that are making a deliberate investment in increasing their productive capacities. That comes on the allocation, how the allocated amounts have been used. But you find in the context of a country like Zimbabwe, in most Southern African countries, the amounts that are allocated to ministries, at least 80% of them are spent on administrative and personnel costs, salaries, which compromises this whole discourse about increasing the productive capacity of the people. So yeah, I think let me make that my conclusion. And I hope this has been worthwhile to discuss conceptual issues. What we're trying to do, as I was saying when we started, for those who were not there, is want to create a community of practice where we bridge the gap that exists between conceptual issues and programmatic issues that we deal with every day. And sometimes why we face challenges or why we disagree amongst ourselves as civil society is because of these conceptual issues that we have not attended to. So this is what CRNSA is hoping to do through this series of webinars that we shall be conducting. And we are going to be tapping into your expertise as well, so that next time, perhaps it's not me, it could be John, it could be Maxime, it could be Kathy, it could be Moleboeng, it could be Brenda, you know, who will be articulating issues to us so that we get to learn from this. Any last remarks from the people who are in the room, virtual room, that is?
In the room.
Yeah, virtual room.
Musa, somehow I caught a glimpse of one slide you jumped.
Okay.
Which was showing somehow the value for money matrix. Would you get back to that and let's see what are the ideas you tried to present in that?
Okay. Value for money matrix. There we are.
In a few words, can you explain it?
All right. Okay. You see, this is a long story on its one. Yes. We shall
Make it short.
We shall share the slides. These slides, and I'm hoping to put this into a paper. I think at the core of value for money, when we're talking about public investment in children, are four things. In fact, in development, they call them the 4 E's of value for money, you know. The first one is equity, at the center of it. When we're talking about equity, we're saying when the money has been allocated, or in fact, starting at national fiscal level, are we allocating to ministries that have the most need, ministries that are going to reach out to more people, or to whose cascading effect is high. So when we're talking about equity, we're talking about trying to bring those that have been left behind to be at par. And for example, if a budget has been allocated to the Ministry of Education to what extent is the allocation going to benefit the rural and the remote schools and children? So you will find that sometimes the government does not exercise such due diligence to make sure that it benefits the ones that are left behind, especially the remote areas. So equity speaks to issues of, are we targeting right people? Are we reaching out to right people? You know, that's number one. The second E is on effectiveness. Are the government programs achieving the results they said they will achieve? For example, if we have a national development plan which wants to create 2.2 million jobs, when you're looking at effectiveness, you are just asking a question to say, to what extent is the government able to create the 2.2 million jobs? And what mechanisms are in place to achieve the said goals? And what will be the impact of those goals, you know? Hello?
Hello? Yes, I can hear now.
Oh, you're there? Okay.
I can hear you now.
Yes. So effectiveness is looking at the impacts of the interventions or of the investment to say, what is the long-term impact of this investment which government is doing? Efficiency is really about what we're talking about, the judicious use of the resources. Here in South Africa, there's a lot that is talked about on tenderpreneurship and state capture, where the state has been used as a platform to make money. For example, when there's a tender to build a road, who gets the tender? Are they competent? Is it value for money? For example, meaning, are they going to give us the best service at the lowest cost possible? You know, so yeah, efficiency speaks to how do we convert these resources that we have into outputs at the lowest cost. Then economy is really about the money. What I was saying to say, how are we getting the lowest possible service provider, the lowest service provider? Is it lowest? The cheapest, yeah, that's right. The cheapest service provider who produce the highest quality, you know, to balance that nexus between being cheap and providing quality service. Sometimes it's a hassle, you know, because we always say cheap is expensive. It's not always so that cheap is expensive, but sometimes cheap is expensive. But there is need to make sure that the nexus between cost and deliverable is balanced. I think in a nutshell, that's what I would say this is. So there is need to make sure that we measure government expenditures on using this framework to say, is there value for money? Is there equity? Are we targeting the most needy? Are the interventions going to achieve their results? Is there judicious use of the resources? And are we being economical with our interventions? You know. Yeah, I would say it that way. What do you think?
Thank you. I mean, I can see Maxim is talking.
Maxim?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
I think, yeah, it's a good initiative. I think the issue of effectiveness, equity, efficiency, and economy, trying to balance the two. But I think we also need to reflect on ourselves as civil society.
Yeah.
At maybe individual level, as part of the citizens of the country, and then at implementing how they're now going to achieve all those if us in civil society are also suffering in the same dilemma like the people are trying to assist. So there's that dilemma. You can also not afford to send your children to decent schools.
Yeah.
Yet you also want to advocate also for better things to come.
Yeah.
So that balance, I think, we often neglect ourselves. We say there's an assumption that as long as you're in civil society, you are better placed than the beneficiaries that you are advocating for. But I think that's a dilemma, internal dilemma that we need also to reflect on as civil society in the broader context.
Yeah, I think always as a starting point, introspection and reflecting on ourselves is very key. I always say to civil society that does governance work to say, before you go and tell government to do leadership renewal, for example, we need to do it ourselves. Before we tell governments about good corporate governance, do we have the same principles within our systems? And you're right, Maxime, that the starting point is reflection on ourselves. For example, when we are doing work as civil society, to what extent do we use value for money principles? You know, in hiring consultants, for example, in choosing venues for workshops, or all those things. So you will find that sometimes we are found wanting ourselves before we even go to governments to ask about the 4 E's of value for money. Brenda, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I wanted to speak some earlier around budget and also tracking how much of it we contributed towards welfare. I'm feeling that we might go a step further in that direction to see from the national fiscus whatever it is that has been allocated towards the welfare of children, whether it's education or it's health or it's social services. If it managed to cascade, if it was dispersed, there's a tendency that we might find that there is a huge budget that measured, but the disbursement, you never see materializing it at implementation level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's profound. But sometimes we, civil society, we celebrate and ululate when, for example, a minister allocates 30% to education, 30% of the national budget. But like Brenda is saying, to what extent was the entire amount disbursed to the Ministry of Education? You'll find that sometimes between allocation and disbursement, there's a disconnect. Or sometimes you will find some ministries who get all their fully allocated amount but can't use it all. They have to return to the national treasury to say, we couldn't finish this month, like we sometimes do with our budgets as CSOs. So this is another challenge that we have to do as civil society to make sure that we are monitoring, they call it budget tracking, from allocation to disbursement. Oh, please proceed.
Or like you were mentioning around the effectiveness and how much of it is used, whether it's effective and economical, that the budget is dispersed. Like we take, for example, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Primary Education, where you find CSOs while contributing towards the BEAM project, like the international organizations. But most of that goes to the allowances of staff and ministry staff and their cooperatives.
I think we will talk about this more when we're talking about domestic resource mobilization. It's one of those examples that I was having to say we cannot have the social policy of a country being financed by external resources, because you and I know that external resources come with conditionalities, and these conditionalities may be giving you with one hand but taking with the other hand. Eventually it's your country at a loss. So the reason why we have to emphasize more about domestic resource mobilization. At the same time, Jones, are you there? I want to use a term that has just been developed in Africa. At the same time, Magufuli how those resources are used. You know, I hear Magufuli is coming up with a lot of cost-cutting measures, and starting with his own trips is traveling in economy class and has reduced the numbers of the entourage that he travels with. This is what we hear. I don't know about what it is like.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I got my own reservations with that. Of course, yes, I mean, he's trying to clean up some of the, the wastages that were, it's very clear that these were clear wastages within the government spending, but it's yet to be seen how that is translating into an increase in allocation, for instance, in sectors that matter, especially when you're talking of allocation to the social sector. And we have seen, for instance, one typical example is where they had to clean the ghost workers, the huge numbers of people were not even there, but salaries were going to ghost accounts. But then you see the wage bill of civil service still going up. Instead of, you would expect that the wage bill would be going down. Quite to the contrary, the wage bill is still going up without any salary increase, without promotion to workers, without that kind of discussion that's coming up, and it's making people wonder why we are actually seeing the reverse, effect of what we should be seeing otherwise, a decline in expenditure, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I know that when you are listening from a distance, it always sounds very romanticized, and these things are important. But otherwise, there's a concept which has been developed called Magufulizing things, which is a cost-cutting mechanism, where you find the cheapest way of doing things. So I think there's a Twitter handle called "What Would Magufuli Do?" Where if you say I want to go to town, you ask what would Magufuli do? You say instead of calling Uber, let me walk to town. Magufuli would save money.
Well, it depends where traveling.
Musa, I one other issue regarding, I heard you talking very convincingly about the government tending to ignore its primary duty to provide for certain services because they see there are other providers outside the public. I mean, the civil society organizations and all that. But to me, that relates more. You can look at it at a much more broad picture in terms of in terms of lack of capacity within the government. CSO moving not because they is for pleasure, rather it's an imperative to save where there is a proven lack of capacity within the government to provide for that particular service. And so, I mean, it's not an issue of, say, like the government and the CSOs competing for the same, or one, neglecting his duty because the other is available. Rather, is one who's trying to fill the shoes that is not filled. And we should be able to see that. That's one face of it. But the second face of it is it's an issue of survival and legitimacy for civil societies as well. I mean, if they don't do that, what will they be doing?
There will be a lot of unemployment.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. Don't provide. But my submission was that in such instances where yeah, my submission was that in such instances where the government is where the government has limited capacity for civil society that are providing services, they at least have to have a component on answering the sustainability question to say, how can we help the government increase its capacity so that eventually they take over this responsibility, rather than to say, if the government can't do it, hurrah, we will run with it and we don't care whether the government would take it up or not. But like you're saying again, this is a called civil society economy, where it creates employment for all of us.
Exactly.
So it could be a conflict of interest again on our part to lobby government to take over what we are doing, because if they do, either they have to employ us or we are unemployed.
I know.
Yeah, I think we have to conclude this discussion. We have way overshot our time. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
Thank you. I hope we will share the slides.
The slides, certainly I will. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your patience and for your time. We look forward to engaging with you going forward, and I'm glad also the people who indicated interest to be part of the regional advisor group on public investment in children participated. So you guys were going to be working with you quite a lot. So I may request that we may hold a Skype call or another webinar soon so that we may talk about this, and next year we can have a physical meeting to chart the way forward. So
I was not consulted about that one.
Oh, you didn't see the memo? Don't worry.
No.
You will see the memo. You will see the memo. Oliver will send you the memo.
But I hear the group has already been constituted. So
You mean the nominations?
Yes.
yeah, the process here, the process, Musa. You want to account government and yourself you are not going.
No, but you were not part of the. Did you not copy? Because we asked people who are interested in it to participate.
No, I didn't see that memo.
To declare interest. Oh, okay. So I think we'll make sure that you see it. It's not too late. But colleagues, thank you very much. If you have any other suggestions or any other documents or journal papers that you come across or that we have which enrich this discussion that we have been having, please share with us. And next time, please share with us also your Twitter handles so that we can start tweeting what we are doing here, so that we create a strong movement eventually. Thank you so much. Have a very wonderful day. You deserve it.
Thank you, Musa.
Thank you, Musa. Well done.
Pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well done.
Bye.
All right, let us go. We are going to farm now.
Oh, okay. Travel well.
Okay, sure.
Ngoni Musendo, are you there? Huh? He's coming. Okay, what else do we have to do? How do I leave? How do I leave? I'm not knowing. I don't know how to close this thing.